It's time to move on to the little guy. We call these short little guys the pawn. In fact, in some languages, they're called the farmers. Why? Well, because they're really good workers. Now, the pawns don't seem to have a lot of power, but you get 8 of them, so it's incredibly important to become a chess master of the pawns. The pawns are the only piece that do not start on the back row. If you're the white team, they're going to start on row number 2, and if you're the black team, they're going to start on row number 7. In order to explain the pawns, let's get rid of all but one for each side. In this chess position, to show you how the white pawn moves, the pawn can go forward 1 square to the square e3. So I'm going to move that pawn forward to e3. Now, forward for the black team is going to be down the board because we have to pretend that there's somebody dangling from the top of your screen playing black.
Hello.
And down the board for him, or forward, would be this way. The pawn comes down the board. The white pawn can go move forward once more, and the black pawn can move forward, and now we reach a very special position. So far, every piece we've talked about has captured the exact same way that he moves, but not so for pawns. When a pawn is moving along, minding his own business, he goes forward, but when he wants to capture, that's when he moves diagonal. He's only allowed to go diagonal 1 square when he wants to capture. So, the white pawn can move diagonal 1 square and land on top of the black pawn. If it was black's turn, black could actually do the same to white. The black pawn could go diagonal, land on top of the white pawn, and that would be the black pawn capturing. Remember, forward depends on which color you are. If I were to give black a second pawn, can you figure out which pawn white is allowed to capture? Well, it's the pawn on d5. We just talked about that. If black had a pawn on the square f5, white could also capture that pawn.
Ow!
What about if black's pawn was on the square g6? Could white capture? No, because the pawn is not a bishop. The pawn can never go 2 squares diagonal. That would be changing the power of the pawn. We can't do that. In this position, in fact, the white pawn is stuck. It's kind of like if mom or dad's car couldn't go in reverse. You'd pull the car into the garage at night and you'd just be stuck because it can never go backward. Pawns will often get stuck in chess. That's a normal part of being a pawn. The black pawn is also stuck. Can the black pawn go diagonal to a blank square? No, you can't capture thin air. That'd be crazy. You can only go diagonal when you are capturing. What if white had a rook on the square h4, and that rook wasn't thinking straight, and he went sideways to the square f4? Where could the black pawn move now? Well, the black pawn could go diagonal 1 square and capture the white rook. Notice that would free up this pawn to move, and the pawns would be able to move along their way. Pawns can never go backward. This pawn on the square f4 cannot go backward to capture the white pawn. It also can't go backward to the 7th row where he began. The pawn can only go forward just like the car who doesn't go in reverse. And there's one more rule we have to learn about pawns. There's a special time when a pawn can go 2 squares. When a pawn is making its very first move, it has the option of going 1 or 2. We know if a pawn's making its first move because it's on the starting row. The white pawns start on number 2. The black pawns start on rank number 7. Is this pawn making its first move? Yes. So it can move 1 or 1, 2. It is your choice. Let's have the black pawn go 1 square. You still have the option of going 1 if you want to. Now it's white's turn. Every single white pawn can move 1 or 2, except for which one? The pawn e4. He can only move 1 square because he's no longer on the starting row. You better not move 1 square though, because if you do, the black pawn would simply capture you. It's really important to sometimes move 1 and sometimes move 2, depending on what's going on. What if we go all the way back to this chess position and we give each side 1 pawn each? If it's the white team's turn, is this pawn on the home row? Yes, this pawn is on number 2, so he can go 2 squares. If you're the black team, you're also on the home row. Could you go 2 squares? Yes, but do you want to? No. If you go 2 squares, can you see what white's going to do? White will land on top of you and take you off the chessboard. So what I would do is go 1 square, and then when the white pawn moves, he has to go 1. He's not on the home row anymore, and then black would be able to capture white. Pawns have a little bit of trickiness to them, but if you can remember to move forward but capture diagonal and never go backward, you are on your way to becoming a better farmer, chess master.